Climate change, the significant changes in global temperature, precipitation, and wind patterns over long periods of time. Through the study of ice cores, tree rings, corals, and ocean sediments, scientists have been able to extend climate records back millions of years to accurately determine changes in the climate. While the Earth has naturally cooled and warmed gradually in the past, evidence reveals that current warming is occurring 10 times faster than the rate of Ice Age recovery warming. A study published by NASA found that atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide, the primary heat-trapping greenhouse gas, have raised by 47% since before the Industrial Revolution, when humanity began burning fossil fuels and destroying forests at unprecedented rates. Separately, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found that human emissions and activities have caused almost 100% of the warming observed since 1950. My name's Anthony Padilla, and today I'm going to be sitting down with climate scientists and scholars to learn more about this phenomenon and how this field of research affects those who have devoted their lives to learning about the seemingly inevitable destruction of their planet. Are these climate scientists confident that enough progress will be made in time to save our planet? Or are they convinced that humanity's ignorance and incessant need for economic expansion will ultimately result in an apocalypse? Do these climate scientists take pride in their work, finding it truly fulfilling and satisfying? Or does the vast amount of data pointing to the extinction of so many species and humanity as we know it fill them with a paralyzing sense of impending doom? Hello, David.
Hi there, good to meet you.
Kevin.
Hi, how are you?
Shaz.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on here and teaching me about the world of climate change.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for teaching the world about climate change.
What do you consider yourself? A climate scientist? Someone that learns about terrifying things every single day?
No, I'm a climate scientist.
I guess I'm a scientist who's worked on climate change forever.
So I consider myself to be a climate social scientist.
What are the biggest contributing factors to climate change?
And the main way humans influence climate change is by interfering with the natural flows of energy through the climate system. And the main way we do that is by changing what is called the greenhouse effect. In other words, we're changing the composition of the atmosphere. We're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. There's now about 45% more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there was around the late 1800s. That's clearly from human activities.
You can think about sources of carbon dioxide, but also sinks of carbon dioxide. And if we keep adding sources, which are fossil fuels, when we burn carbon into the atmosphere, that increases the amount of emissions. But we're also removing things from our environment that can that can naturally suck up these emissions, like trees. The oceans are already starting to get very acidic.
How long have you been studying climate change? And do you remember what it was specifically that made you realize that you needed to go into your specific field?
I grew up in Dubai, which is part of the United Arab Emirates. It's not part of Illinois.
Is there a Dubai, Illinois? Is that a real place?
Yeah, I'm like, no, it's not part of Illinois. I got to see and experience the country transform over the span of a short decade while I was growing up there. And then I came to the US to study physics and math and then engineering. Trying to put all of these pieces together, I said, all right, I really want to figure out how to solve climate change. And within the problem of climate change, we have the technology, but we didn't have the political will and the public support. And so that's what I've been trying to work on for the past decade.
Do you have any examples of things that most people would consider to be marvelous displays of human technological advancements that are actually causing long-term negative effects on the Earth?
You know, I saw a cartoon which was quite cute, actually. I don't have to worry about global warming. I've got air conditioning. But what does the air conditioning do? It's using electricity. In fact, you know, if you've got your electricity bill, that it can use quite a lot of electricity. And what's that electricity generation doing? It's pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because it's using the electricity. And so it's exacerbating the problem, as it turns out.
The combustion engine.
The combustion engine, okay.
All technologies, when they come into play, you know, they have their benefits and costs, right? That's why we use these technologies. But I would say the combustion engine is both an amazing invention, but where we are right now, it's really problematic.
I feel like it's so easy for humanity to see these technological advancements as nothing but positive, and that's why they pick up so much steam. Everyone adopts these things like the combustion engine, and it's difficult for them to see the long-term effects.
Yeah, and so the thing is, every time you turn on the switch, there's electricity. Every time you open the faucet, there's water. Every time you need food, it just happens to be there. You want something from Amazon, it's there. And a lot of the costs that are associated with this that are not internalized into how we're using these resources are invisible.
There are laws with like, cigarettes, for example, in certain states in the US where it'll show like lungs being, damaged lungs and long-term effects. Can you imagine if every time we ordered something off Amazon, there was a label on there that showed all the resources that went into getting that package delivered to you, all the fuel that was burned and put into the atmosphere? I can only imagine, even seeing that, people wouldn't be able to really believe it.
No, and it's not even about believing. We need facts and we need feelings. So the facts alone are not enough, because you might know that there is a problem. You might know smoking cigarettes is bad for you, but you need to be effectively motivated. And if you're not motivated, the facts alone sort of, won't be enough. And so our story should not necessarily be, hey, tighten your belt and stop, remove yourself from the economy, because that really isolates people. It guilt shames people. And that's not what that's not what my story is when I try to communicate things about climate change. We really need to think about the entire system. We are small agents within this entire system, but that doesn't mean that we should not do anything.
What do you think are some of the worst things that will occur if humanity ignores climate change?
The most obvious bad thing is actually the simplest. It's just high temperatures. People don't do well when it's very hot. People learn less well, they're less productive, they live shorter, they die in big heat waves. And there's a whole lot of evidence now that shows these effects are really strong. So I'm involved in a study that's looking at a region by region level in the US. On really hot years, people take home less money.
Right.
And poor people, who often are more likely to have outside jobs, take home even less money.
And you bring up a good point. The people who are more financially stable, living in more developed countries, are able to almost find ways by using their money to act like climate change doesn't exist, by equipping their houses with filtration systems and turning on their air conditioning when it's hot out. And they're almost able to live life as if it's not occurring at all.
There's an unbelievable difference in vulnerability.
Before we learn more about the world of climate change,
I'm just speechless. I'm so angry that we wasted so much time.
How can you be so sure you're right? And remember, the way scientists are trained, scientists hate to agree with each other. The way I win in science is to show the other guy is wrong.
I wanted to take a moment to talk about the importance of voting. The last day to register to vote by mail in the US was October 6th, but you can still register to vote in person in most states up until the actual election day on November 3rd. That's right, check your calendar, you still got time. In 2016, only 58% of eligible citizens voted, which means that over 100 million eligible voters did not vote in the presidential election. It may sometimes feel like our individual existence is meaningless. Yes, I know, but I promise in the grand scheme of things, your vote does count more than you might know. Sitting down here and speaking with these scientists and scholars from around the world has reminded me just how urgent we all need to act in ensuring we elect representatives, and I don't just mean a president, who actually believe in scientific evidence and are willing to make changes to ensure our future isn't as bleak and inevitably apocalyptic as our discussions in this episode might feel. I'll include a link in the description so you can check to see if you're already registered and to find your local polling station if you need to go there and vote in person. And on a completely separate note, I am so happy to announce that this video is sponsored by Simply Safe. As you know, sponsors help us continue covering topics like this one and support the crew of wonderful people that help make this series possible. Simply Safe is an incredibly effective, reliable home security system that helps ensure your home is safe. After you order it online or over the phone, you set it up yourself in under an hour, and your home will then be professionally monitored 24/7. So if anything happens, local authorities will be notified, if that makes you feel a bit more at ease. They've got sensors to cover every window, room, and door, plus tons of other great extras like water sensors, temperature sensors, and HD cameras. So just to break it down a bit further, there's the home base station, cameras, sensors, and a few other useful items depending on what you need. And if you feel overwhelmed by how many options you got, no worries. Their website will help you find the product bundle that's right for you, and you have 60 days to test it out with their love it or return it policy. Home security is super important for us, especially for our studio here, so we were thrilled to check out these security products and make you aware of them as well. So visit simplysafe.com/Anthony Padilla to learn more, or just click the link down in the description so you can go support them, support us, and keep your home safe. And that's all for today's special messages. Now back to the world of climate change. What do you think is maybe the most shocking climate change related information that you can think of off the top of your head?
The term global warming, people immediately associate that with increases in temperature. And the part which is most surprising to people is all of the aspects relating to other parts of the weather, and in particular the rainfall, the snowfall, the storms, the hurricanes, and all of those aspects.
Can you explain how climate change and global warming could cause something like increased snowfall?
As long as the temperature is higher than it would have been, but still below freezing, the atmosphere contains more moisture. In fact, that's one of the key points about global warming, is that the atmosphere holds about 4% more moisture for a 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature. And so this is what's been happening on the East Coast at times when you get a storm that has a lot of cold air associated with it, but then it picks up all of this extra moisture that's residing over the Gulf Stream and over the Atlantic, and you can get really big storms.
The part that's most surprising to me is that we as humans, we can see this problem and we see it coming, and we're not doing much to stop it. And that's like more of a philosophical, ethical, moral question, as opposed to sort of like, all right, the science type question. But we see this huge problem and its huge effects on all of us. But we are so motivated by our myopic needs and wants and desires that we're not getting our shit together.
I feel like so many people are now finally kind of just in a unanimous agreement in certain areas of culture, but yet those same people, myself included, will be like, oh man, this is a really horrible problem. All right, cool, well I better order this thing off Amazon because it's convenient.
But what we also need to understand is that I get asked all the time, Anthony, what should I do to help with this problem? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, there's nothing specifically that one individual can do to actually truly affect the problem. In collective, we have so much power. As individuals, we have less power. So we need to figure out how to collectively transform a system.
I feel like people feel really disenfranchised when they feel like their individual attempts and their individual sacrifices from convenience are not making any kind of direct, immediate impact. And I feel like it's difficult when you realize that everyone has to not only make one change, but maybe 10 or more very specific changes.
That's absolutely right.
Is the push toward consumer level changes like driving electric vehicles and going vegan as helpful as we might believe, or do you think changes need to happen on a much bigger scale?
We need individuals to change, but we also need the system to change, and they're really integrated. They're not like this, and it's a false dichotomy to think that they're separated. But where the change needs to happen most is the system, because without the system, you and I being vegan, or you and I sort of using our bicycles rather than driving, it's a drop in the bucket, and we need an ocean right now.
So it does need to happen on a system scale, system-wide level, but we all are part of that system, and if we demand less of these things that contribute negatively to the environment, then less of these things will be made.
Thinking through history and how those changes have happened, what are the lessons learned that we can apply to climate change? And I think that's an open question. That's not something I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
Is there anything that keeps you hopeful about the future of climate change?
Most of all, it's actually the actions of young people. In the last couple of years, this kind of youth revolution, this Fridays for the Future, people would have heard of Greta, but there's a whole bunch of different young Greta-like people all over the world. And they've really, I think, been forcing people to confront the hypocrisy.
So you're telling me that Gen Z is doing something good?
Seems so.
It is the young people who are going to be more and more negatively affected by all this. In 20 years, those young people will have even more of a reason to fight for not just the future of humanity and the planet and the species that exist on it, but for themselves as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where it really is this inequality of age. I mean, the big impacts of climate change mostly come late this century when I'm not here.
Why do you think the discussion of climate change has become so overwhelmingly political?
Well, partly it's political because there really are winners and losers. So I'm speaking to you from Canmore, Alberta, and I've been an Albertan for a while, though I'm also a professor at Harvard. And Alberta is oil and gas country. And the reality is if we act on climate the way I want us to, some of my neighbors lose their jobs. My brother-in-law gets hurt. That is the real world here. And that means there's a natural political combat. It's kind of gone beyond the healthy, there's a trade-off political combat into this unbelievable polarization where a bunch of people on the political right really want to claim that climate change just doesn't exist. The climate scientists are just making it up, which is utter nonsense. And a bunch of people on the left want to claim, at least some of them, that this problem is really easy to solve. That if we could just sue the oil and gas companies to prevent them blocking solar panels, we just clean it all up tomorrow. And neither of those extreme views are correct.
And I think that the push toward radicalization, pushing further and further in opposing directions, is really helping no one. We need to find what actually helps. What is the logical thing to do with scientific evidence?
For sure.
How do you feel about the way governments are handling climate change?
When Trump said that they were going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and instead a lot of other countries have not followed through on their own commitments either, and so we're on a track which is heading us towards really substantive climate change that could ultimately be existential a threat.
I feel like we get a D-. We can give a D- to the government.
We didn't get an F.
Well, we'll give them an F, actually. I didn't realize F was on the table. I mean, I'm just speechless. I'm so angry that we wasted so much time. I don't even know where to start. I think it's everything from the Paris Agreement and trying to leave that all the way to sort of the Environmental Protection Agency having less power.
We have done an enormous job, not just in the US, but in most of the rich world and now in China, in cleaning up the air with air pollution laws. It's not as good as it should be, but it's much better. And water pollution, and global ozone, the first global treaty for the environment to protect the ozone layer, it works. And in each of these cases, there was disputes about science. In each of these cases, there was industry that said, you can't do this or you'll put it out of business. And we did it. And we have done those past things successfully, and that's a reason to believe we can do climate.
I really needed to hear that. I've been feeling just horrible about the direction we're heading in, so thank you for sprinkling a little positivity in there, and I'm sure everyone watching this also needed to hear something like that.
Good. History matters, and there's good history.
Nadia wants to know if there's anything that we're told affects climate change but actually doesn't, and vice versa.
One of the environmental acts that most people do is recycling. And the sad truth is that domestic household recycling really doesn't have much benefit. There are things that people don't think about much that have huge climate impacts. Flying really is a big climate impact. People who may think they're living really green and take a bunch of long vacation flights, those have a big climate impact. And while I'm still a meat eater, it is really true that diet, when you look at the whole supply chain, really has a significant impact, and shifting to a less meat diet or no meat diet has a real impact.
And on a national or global scale, that could have huge implications.
Yeah, it's a sensible action that people can take.
Growing trees is a wonderful thing to do. They
like
take up
trees.
carbon dioxide. So trees are one way in which we can actually take some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. The question then is what happens to the trees? The only way to really use trees to take carbon dioxide out of the system is by harvesting the trees and then disposing of those trees in a way where they are never used and come back because if you use them for paper, it goes into a landfill, they decay, and they generate carbon dioxide and methane, and they go back into the atmosphere.
So even planting trees, which seems extremely helpful, if those trees die or are destroyed or harvested in any way, that goes right back into the atmosphere, maybe has an adverse effect.
Yes.
Ayla wants to know what the most urgent action to fight climate change is and what we should be putting first.
I think the first thing would be to vote in November. The second thing would be to start getting involved in local politics as well. And whatever your skill is, and whatever you're passionate about, use that to sort of spread the word about climate change, talk to people about climate change, create climate action.
The most urgent action in countries like the US is really to get rid of the remaining coal-fired electric power. I think the other thing has to happen is a lot of research on long-run things that could really reduce the risks. So I think we do need to understand how we could take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in the long run. And this particular kind of wacky and controversial thing that I work on, which is called solar geoengineering, the idea that humans might deliberately alter the Earth's temperature. It's the idea that humans might deliberately make the Earth more reflective by, say, deliberately putting aerosols, fine particles, into the upper atmosphere or making some kind of clouds whiter, a deliberate manipulation of nature to make the Earth more reflective so it absorbs a little less heat from the sun, which would reduce the amount of climate change that there is for a given amount of CO2 in the air.
So with geoengineering, you can actually potentially reduce the heat of the Earth within years, or what?
It's technically possible to reduce the Earth's temperature within, say, a decade in a way that you could not do by cutting emissions even to zero. And it'd be very hard to do by pulling CO2 out of the air. But I think the way to think about this is a combination. So we have to cut emissions. For sure we do. Nothing about geoengineering changes that.
Right.
But we might want to cut emissions and also do this as a way to further reduce the risks.
Would some people consider that just like a Band-Aid on the problem, and where, if that were to happen and if that were to work, people would say, oh, we'll just do geoengineering and we don't need to worry about changing any of the way that we're affecting the climate otherwise?
Absolutely. And that's the reason why a lot of people who are environmentalists actually don't like the work I'm doing and say we shouldn't talk about it. It's not that they necessarily believe it actually would be dangerous, but they're terrified that it'll be like this get out of jail free card. People will say, well, we don't need to worry, party on, burn all the fossil fuels we want.
Even if we were to use geoengineering and reduce the temperature of the global climate, there would still be negative implications of continuing to burn fossil fuels and release those greenhouse gases into the atmosphere regardless, right?
For sure, the long-run climate risk is proportional to the total amount of carbon we burn, and nothing about geoengineering changes that.
How do you feel when you hear people claiming that some people are just completely overreacting about climate change because the climate has always changed as a natural part of the Earth's rhythm?
It's been more than 10 million years since we've had this level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the level we will get to this century. So it's true that climate has changed and carbon dioxide has changed, but the rate we're putting it in will take us back to the CO2 level we saw 55 million years ago when there were alligators in the Arctic. We can go back there in a single human lifetime in CO2 concentration, given the rate we're putting it in.
Ugh, that hit hard. I do not want alligators in the Arctic kind of weather. That doesn't sound good to me.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we won't actually have alligators in the Arctic in 100 years.
Well, they won't go back, but they could live there
potentially. The CO2 level
potentially.
is that high, yeah.
We can demonstrate very clearly now from a number of different ways that, yes, it's humans that are causing this change. One of the ways is by looking at the different kinds of carbon. When we burn fossil fuels, the age of those, that coal and oil, is old enough that all of the C14 has decayed, and so that's putting C12, the carbon, the regular carbon, into the atmosphere. And so we can, by looking at the composition of the carbon dioxide, we can say, this is rich in C12 and there's no C14, which means it hasn't come from local trees, because that would have this isotope of carbon in it. And so that's one way we can clearly show that we're changing the composition of the atmosphere with carbon dioxide.
In my small experience, it's not been very successful. And so, again, it goes into facts and feelings, and you have to sort of try to understand what is their worldview, how did they arrive to this statement. And so when you ask a few questions down that rabbit hole, a lot of people actually don't know. They've heard it somewhere. I mean, I think it's akin to cigarette smoking, that I don't want to know what's happening. And so not knowing relieves a lot of the pressure from me in terms of what I have to do. Because if I didn't know, then there's nothing that I need to do.
Many people have so many things to worry about already that it's almost easier to be ignorant about these things, because then you have another thing that's causing you worry or stress in the back of your mind, and it's already so overwhelming.
And you're absolutely right. We have so many things we need to be concerned about. But this is a fight. This is a long haul fight. And it goes back to what I said earlier, is that we see this problem, and if we as a species cannot do much in terms of trying to solve the problem that we ourselves created, that actually says a lot about our species.
What's the strangest or worst argument you've heard against climate change science?
Just, I don't care. Like the apathy. It's both sad and strange, because I'm like, really? You don't care? One of the biggest psychological challenges of climate change is you can't see carbon dioxide with your naked eye. You can't see what the concentration.
Imagine if we could. Imagine if we could see the carbon in the atmosphere.
Out of roughly a million molecules, roughly 410 of them are carbon dioxide. So it just sounds really small. And so it sounds like, all right, I've got all of these other problems, all of these other worries. Why care about this? And so I think one of the huge challenges that we have is, how do you make the invisible visible?
If there's anyone watching who is utterly convinced that climate change is a hoax or isn't caused by humans whatsoever, they're probably commenting right now. In fact, is there anything you'd want to say to them?
How can you be so sure you're right? And remember, the way scientists are trained, scientists hate to agree with each other. The way I win in science is to show the other guy is wrong. Scientists hate consensus. The whole way you score points is to show that all the other people were wrong. That's how you get ahead.
Right. You want to have that label of, I discovered it.
Exactly. So the idea that scientists are going to kind of collectively fool themselves for half a century with this extraordinarily complicated thing, it just doesn't hold up.
Inversely, if there's anyone watching who feels an overwhelming sense of dread considering the bleak future of humanity and our planet, is there anything you want to say to them?
If you feel an overwhelming sense of dread, which I do on occasion, you need to fill up your bucket again, fill up your bucket of self-care, and then get ready to mobilize and act. Right now, it's all hands on deck.
If we take actions now and we decarbonize the economy and so on, we can slow down and maybe even stop climate change. And so if we can push that out 50 years, it enables us to adapt to climate change, to build resilience, to, new technology will come along to enable us to deal with it a little better.
What do you think the biggest misconception is about scientists researching climate change?
We've been accused of lots of things, that we're alarmists of various kinds, and yet most of the alarms, if you want to refer to them that way, that have gone out have actually borne out quite well. And so scientists like myself were calling the shots 20 years ago on what is happening now. And now we're calling the shots to say, watch out, it can easily get worse.
Yeah, you could almost say, hey, we said all these things were going to happen, and now they're happening, and now we're saying they're going to get worse, and they're going to get worse if you don't listen.
Yes.
All right, you got 5 seconds to shout out or promote anything you want directly into camera. Go.
Do what you can to be part of the climate movement. We need you.
Vote and tell the politicians that you talk to that climate change and the environment is your top priority.
Climate change is happening, and one of the most important things probably that you can do is to vote. Vote in the coming election and pay attention to the climate-related aspects.
I'm an old guy, but Anthony Padilla's channel seems to really do a good job dealing with real-world problems in an honest way.
Old guy approved. Thank you so much, David. I feel like I understand the world of climate change just a little bit more.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for doing it.
After spending the day with these climate scientists and scholars, I've come to understand how acquiring such an extensive amount of knowledge about humanity's effects on the Earth is disheartening. And these scientists deserve the utmost respect for often putting their emotional well-being on hold for the greater good of our planet. See you later. Bye, guys.
Press a like.
In reality, what you're doing is learning all this information that is having heavy effects on your emotional well-being, learning about so many devastating things about our future. Like you don't want to feel these negative feelings about the state of the earth.
Yeah, every once in a while, I allow myself to ask myself this question, which is, what could I be studying that does not have that heavy weight?
Yeah.
I'm only allowed to ask myself that question once in a while.